To preface this, I love to drive. Like hours-long drives to nowhere, with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways, cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities. And I'd usually take these drives at night, since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. So now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a cluster of personal issues that I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend. I couldn't focus on anything else, and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too long, since it was getting pretty late. I agreed and gave him a kiss goodbye and left. I drove around the city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my social life, so I decided to drive further north, down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles an hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone, with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road, lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in the snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out of the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I had made the familiar roundabout that would either take me to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing, maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest of it was jutted out onto the road, like they had pulled over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone was hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly. And as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment there was reception, I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response, or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed 3 things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person did not have any blood on them or appear to be injured in any way, but was wearing a mask, not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was, I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards the town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what had happened and what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, and did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of the city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for the police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened, not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you can imagine, super freaked for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive himself down to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave, and that was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruiser pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them that the sedan had been to take a look, and that they would try to catch the guys who did it. Though with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get a chance to get the license plate number, so at the time of my panic, the thought never came into my mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off was a dark-colored sedan with two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made, in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they've had any leads, and I'm not sure if they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car? Or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives anywhere, and I hope that I never cross paths with those freaks again.
When I was around 11 years old in 2014, my family and I had just moved from Tennessee to Texas as my dad was working out a deal for a new job. My brother and I were homeschooled at this time, which meant we could move in with my aunt and uncle with no problems relating to finding a house in a good school district. But that's besides the point. My family was pretty close back then, and all the cousins got along just fine. We loved to do everything together, especially me and my female cousin Peyton. My immediate family, meaning me, mom, dad, brother, sister, had spent the past 7 years without a Jack in the Box. It was terrible. We were all born in Texas, so we loved it. But living in Tennessee, we had to go without it. A particular night, however, all of our parents had gone out to dinner and told us specifically not to leave the house. We were to lock all the doors after they left and play games or something. You might be thinking this is now becoming about an intruder, but I promise you it's 10 times more bizarre. After the parents left, all the cousins got together and we decided that we wanted ice cream and candy. Not that it's important, but I remember Ben and Jerry's being the main target. So we devised a foolproof plan to sneak out and acquire the goods. Well, we thought it was foolproof. My older sister, who would be the driver, my cousin Peyton, and I all loaded into my dad's car that was left at the house, and off we were to get the food. We should not have even left. On our way to the store to get the snacks, we decided that Jack in the Box sounded much better than some sugar, so off we went. The drive was full of Bruno Mars and Meghan Trainor. How does that sound for 2014? As we pulled up through the drive-thru, we decided that it was about 3 cars too long and that we should just go inside and order instead. That was the wrong choice. When we stepped inside, there was one girl in the restaurant. She was short with a small figure, wearing winter clothes, so she looked completely ready for an outing. The girl asked the cashier for a water cup, and proceeded to fill it with either Sprite or some other soda. I remember that the guy at the register looking at her extremely confused. But it was too late in the night, and he could not care less, I'm sure. When she finished filling her cup, she drank it extremely quick, and started to turn around to throw the cup out and leave. I have an awful memory, but I remember her eyes being wide open as if she had seen something scarring. At this point, we had been standing at the entrance doors for the entire interaction, just watching, for whatever reason. We were just very nosy, but as she was walking out, I looked down and noticed that she was gripping a large butcher's knife. You guys, this thing was huge. Immediately my heart dropped, and I heard my cousin go, "Oh my god, no way, no way, no way." So the knife-wielding girl leaves the restaurant, and we go on to order our food, talking about it to the guy at the register and kind of laughing it off, but also still curious and confused. As we leave with our food, we see the girl crossing the street to CVS. Now, it was kind of late, but there were still a good number of cars driving on this road at the time. She did not look either way, just crossed with ease, as if invincible. We brushed it off and assumed that she was just doing her own thing, but after a while of eating some tacos and talking about how fun it was to be out without permission, we saw maybe a dozen police lights start to enter the CVS parking lot. Like I said before, we were nosy, so we decided to do what any nosy person does: investigate. We drove over to the CVS parking lot, and we were stopped in the parking lot by an officer to be asked a couple of questions. My memory gets a bit hazy here, but I remember it was a problem because my cousin and I were both minors at the time. Or something about being minors and involving ourselves with the police was a problem. They asked us a couple of questions, and I just remember my sister and cousin explaining that we had seen the girl wielding a knife in the Jack-in-the-Box across the street. So with that, they let us go, and we hurried back home. A little bit later that night, when everyone, parents included, was winding down for bed, our mothers called the three of us into one of the rooms in the house to talk about something. I don't think any of us realized that they knew what we did. They sat us down and calmly asked us what we did tonight, and I think we lied, but I don't quite remember. Either way, it was useless, because they knew everything, even what we didn't know. Our moms told us that someone on Facebook had posted about 3 heroic girls that knew information about the girl in the situation that I'm about to explain to you. Heroic? Hardly. All we did was answer a few questions. Nosy, that's more like it. They told us that the girl had entered the CVS and grabbed a woman by the hair and proceeded to hold the knife to her throat for several minutes before the police could show up. Apparently people had tried to get her off, but it was useless. After all, she had the weapon. The girl was also apparently screaming and just being very violent, but that was so many years ago I can't remember much detail. I know that's not an end-of-the-world nail-biter story, but how bizarre was that? To this day, I still think about how easily it could have been one of us with a knife to the throat, in a Fort Worth Jack-in-the-Box. Or how easily someone could have been killed. But also, if it wasn't for the girl, we wouldn't have got through that night with our foolproof plan. So, hey, Jack-in-the-Box knife girl, let's not meet again. Also, we never got our ice cream or candy. Only PTSD. My cousin and I now laugh about this all the time, and refer to it as our Witness Protection Program moment.
In 2012, I, a 20-year-old female, went with my boyfriend to a diner on a Wednesday night. There was this place that was advertising free pie when you spend a certain amount of money, so we decided to go there. The restaurant was right by his apartment, literally less than a 5-minute drive. It was a rainy night, and the restaurant was in a southern college town, but not close enough to campus to get much of a late-night crowd, and definitely not in the rain. Both of us enjoy quiet places, so we spontaneously decided to give it a try. When we got there, it was normal enough, a bland-looking chain restaurant shaped like a U. From one end of the restaurant, it would be impossible to see what was going on at the other end. So it was around 9 p.m, and not all restaurants are going to be open past then, but diners like this often are. The Waffle House and Denny's near campus is usually pretty busy late into the night, but this place was empty, except for one bubbly female staff member. Now, I used to work in food service, so I asked the waitress what time they were closing, because I hate when people come right at closing time. She said that they were open until midnight. Lucky us. Our waitress was a skinny, petite, maybe 30-year-old woman who sat us away from the front. She introduced herself as Sally, and right away I got the distinct feeling she was lying about her name. It was just the way she took a moment to smile after she'd said it, reminding me of the way my sister, who is a certified pathological liar, would slip in a little lie here and there. So something was a little off, but nothing alarming. I mean, my sister is completely harmless. I then noticed Sally wasn't wearing a name tag, just jeans and a polo shirt. She gave us some menus and again said her name. And again, I'm picking up on those subtle body language cues I'd learned from living with a habitual liar. So I'm thinking Sally is full of crap. It stands out in my memory as my first impression. My second impression was, damn, this lady talks a lot. I haven't seen you before, are you new? Here for college? I had great roommates in college. Do you have any roommates? Aren't Thursdays the worst? There's nothing to do. Do you have any plans for later? It was kind of annoying, but she seemed nice, even if a bit fake, and we figured she was just bored out of her mind, and/or making an effort to get tips for being friendly. It became clear we were the only guests, and there weren't even other food servers for her to talk to, so as far as I could see, it was just the three of us. We didn't want to be rude, so we just answered her obnoxious questions, thinking it was an attempt at small talk. After our main meal, she then took our order for pie and started chatting it up about the weather. It's so dangerous to drive in the rain, blah blah. It should blow over soon. I'd wait here if I were you, blah blah blah. I actually started to get a bit creeped out. Like, why was she being so clingy? It was not necessarily a feeling of being in danger, but more like, why are you so obsessed with me? I then felt bad for feeling that way. Who did I think I was? Regina George hating on some nerd? The lady probably just needed to bring home some tip money. She came out with our 2 slices of pie and finally gives us some peace. The pie was gross. I had mixed berry and it tasted super fake sweet. Very artificial, like a child's lip gloss flavour. I don't know why I ate more than 1 bite though, other than I was broke and never wasted food. After a few more cringy bites, I looked to the back of the diner, and the waitress was standing near a back door, staring at us with some man. He was heavily set, with pale skin and wearing a sweat-stained white shirt. A huge barrel of a man he was, with a facial expression like he was watching cockroaches he was about to step on. They were both just staring, silently. My blood went cold, and all the hairs on my neck went up. They saw that I was looking at them, so they went into the kitchen quickly. Finally, alarm bells in my brain were ringing like a freaking tornado siren. I whispered to my boyfriend, "We need to leave now. Just sneak out and go." My boyfriend could see I was freaked, so threw down some cash with a big tip, grabbed our jackets, left our gross half-eaten pie, and we bolted. On our drive home, we started laughing at our overreaction. That man was probably just a cranky cook who wanted us to go home so we could chill, and that waitress was just fishing for tips. But boy did she luck out. She got well over 50% tip because I was too chicken to wait for change. I was feeling silly and really rude for judging a book by its cover and running out on the nice lady like that. But then the night went from kinda creepy to quite horrific. I remember laughing in the car, and then I was waking up shivering and shaking in our dark apartment. My boyfriend was laying on top of the bed, fully dressed with his shoes on, and I had been slumped over, half on the bed, half on the floor, also dressed in my rain-soaked jeans and boots, but I think I had my jacket off. It was midnight. Didn't remember parking, unlocking the door, walking inside, or anything from the last 2 hours. I woke my boyfriend up in a panic. He remembered coming back, but not too clearly. He said he'd remembered going to the bathroom and becoming really disorientated, like the room was spinning, but feeling a strange calm. Then nothing. We had both blacked out, something neither of us experienced before or after. We hadn't had a drop of alcohol, or intentionally done any drugs. We are just so lucky that we live so close, literally a 3-minute drive away. If we'd had passed out like that on the road, who knows what would have happened. If we'd have stayed at the restaurant for even 3 more minutes too. This was almost 10 years ago now, and I remember calling the non-emergency police line about it in the morning after, once I'd calmed down a little. The The person I talked to on the phone sounded like they didn't believe me and questioned if I'd been partying, and generally had the tone that I was wasting their time. It was a frustrating phone call where the police officer asked, "Well, what do you want me to do?" I don't remember my response, but it was awful. Probably worse than the feeling of violation from that night was the attitude of annoyance and dismissal from the authorities. Later I looked up the restaurant online, and the hours are 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Just a little extra spice to the WTF soup, and further confirmation that something definitely wasn't right from the get-go. What sober person passes out like that, slumped over the edge of the bed in cold rain-soaked clothes? Two sober people with no history of fainting just collapse for no reason. I think we've all been told never leave your drink alone if you go out to a bar or party, but it never occurred to me that same danger could come from a chatty waitress in a chain restaurant.
This happened in August of 2013. I was visiting Montreal for their Diver Site weekend, which was basically like Pride, but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at the time had met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there, so my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday, and the trip was going great. We went out the first night, walked the streets that were closed off to cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also in the past had a tendency to lose my cell phone, so for about a year prior, I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. So that Friday night we went out to a club, Parking, and it was another fun night. The music was great, and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club, but would circle back and check in on my friend and our host. And I would also run into people that I knew, who were also visiting from Toronto, and ended up taking some MDMA from one of them, and danced some more until I was completely soaked in sweat, so I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and pee. When I got into the bathroom, there was someone leaving, but it looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because I have a hard time using the urinal, and when I came out, I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked in his mid-30s, on the shorter side, and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo t-shirt and jeans, and had glasses, and I remember thinking when I saw him that he reminded me of an accountant. Not sure why that thought popped into my head. I was pretty sure I didn't hear the door, but I couldn't be sure, so I just smiled back and said hello as I went to wash my hands. "Hello," he responded. "Are you having a fun night?" I replied that I was, and that the music was incredible, and was wiping myself down with paper towels on my shirt. "Do you want to do some coke with me?" he asked. Now, this was not the first time I've been offered coke in a bathroom at a nightclub, and had done this in the past, and ended up having some good experiences and met some interesting people. So I was already high and drunk, and not thinking much of it. I said sure, I'd love to, thanks. "I just live right near here. It's at my place if you don't mind coming over. We can do some lines and have a drink, then walk back to the club," he replied. Now, obviously looking back, I realise how very dumb my following actions were, and I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now. But, without thinking about it, I agreed and left with him. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from, because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal, and what parties I had gone to and how old I was and my name. I asked his name, but he instead responded that we had arrived. The whole walk felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were walking. His apartment was in this building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the 2nd floor. You had to climb this long, narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flicked on the lights, and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking and noticed he had carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off, when I noticed that he was locking the door from the inside, with a key above the regular lock, and in that moment, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread like I have never felt before. the danger I had possibly put myself in, and now seeing this person locking their door from inside with a key. I just thought to myself, I'll pretend I didn't see that. I won't take off my shoes, and politely hang out for a few minutes, then ask to head back. I also thought I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw, because I was high. But, as I looked around, everything inside me was just screaming, "You need to get out of there." I went and sat on the arm of the couch. He said I should take off my shoes and relax. I was getting a better look at him now in the light of the apartment. He looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both of the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was okay, and I was eager to get back to dancing, so he said he would make us drinks, then we could go back. The apartment looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open layout with the living room beside the kitchen, and then a hallway in the middle with closed doors painted black, and I could hear music coming from one of the doors. I asked him if someone else was there, as he came from the kitchen with a glass, and he replied no. As he handed me my glass, he looked me up and down. He said, with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face, "You have a very beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some before photos of you before we went back?" Every alarm bell is now going off in my head, and all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and all his Polaroids, and what am I going to do? Because that was such a creepy thing to say, and all I can imagine is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say sure. "Excellent," he says. He then tells me to take off my shoes, and he's going to get the Coke and his camera and to finish my drink. He walked down the hall, takes out his keys, and unlocks the second door, and opens the door enough to slip in and closes it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up, ran over to the sink and dumped my drink, put my shirt on, and ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door wouldn't budge. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me, "What are you doing?" I turned around and he was standing at the base of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck and holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. I thanked him for the drink, gesturing to my empty glass, but that it was getting late and I wanted to get back, but we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow. His demeanour slightly changed. He was still smiling, but his tone when he next spoke sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos. I should just wait for my drink to relax me, and I said no, I wanted to go. This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no went back and forth for about a minute, when he suddenly glared at me, put down the mirror, pointed at the couch, and said, "Sit down, now." Not knowing what to do or how I was going to get out of this, I remembered that there were other units on each side of us, and it had to be around 2:30 in the morning at this point, so I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, the wall. "Shh! Shut up! Be quiet!" he snapped at me as he ran to the door. He quickly unlocked it and told me to get out and stepped aside. I bolted out that door and down the stairs, skipping the bottom steps and hopping over the side of the railing. I looked up behind when I landed, and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to walk, but I knew it was close, and luckily I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to the bar, I found my friend in the same spot dancing. The whole incident must have been less than half an hour. I was too embarrassed about how stupid I had been, and being back in the club, I started to feel bad that I had just freaked out on this nice man, so I didn't say anything, but I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal, and I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered, and trying to make light of it because it was so scary, and it wasn't until years later that I started to think about that night more and more, and realised how much potential I had put myself in. So, strange man from the bathroom that lured me to his place and wanted to take before photos of me, let's not meet ever again.
At 12 years old, I was already riddled with PTSD and severe anxiety. Seeing a therapist twice a week did nothing to stop my extreme paranoia that someone was following me home from school, that someone may be watching me in my bedroom, and that someone may be trying to take me from my front yard. My mum raised 3 children by herself. My older brother was in high school, my younger brother in elementary, and I walked 3 blocks to the middle school just down the street from our house. Always the safe rather than sorry type of parent, my mum insisted that I walk with 2 other girls who lived on my street. As middle schoolers often do, we meandered on our way to school and cut through a yard and parking lots to spend most of the time gossiping. We would often split through a church parking lot if we were in a hurry, usually thrush with cars in the morning and afternoon from preschoolers in the back. It wasn't unusual to see the same cars every day on our school run, and again on our way back. The other girls thought nothing of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched on our trek home. In the winter months of my 7th grade year, we used our shortcut every day. The preschool was shut for renovations, so the icy parking lot was empty and perfect for throwing snowballs or sliding on patches of ice. Only a few cars regularly lingered in the front of the building, except one white pickup truck that was parked in the back. Every time I saw it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Every morning and afternoon, a man would be sitting in the driver's seat of the truck, looking out the window watching us walk. I told my mother the first time I saw him, knowing I was prone to panic. She brushed it off and told me he must work at the church. The second time I brought it up, she gave me a pink canister of pepper spray and told me to use it first and apologize later. I gripped it in my cold hand every day after that when we passed the man in his truck. I described him to my mother in detail. A few weeks after we saw the truck for this first time, we crossed the lot after school and found it empty. I breathed the fresh breath, putting my pepper spray in my bag and kicking up powdery snow out of relief. That joy died when I turned down my street and saw the truck parked in a driveway 5 houses down from mine. I sprinted home, locked the door behind me, and counted the minutes until my mother would come home from work. When she finally did, I berated her with my questions. Who was the man? Did he live there? What did she know? But my mum's answers were short and non-descriptive. As a single mother, she didn't mingle much with the neighbors and seldom had time to inquire about who lived where. She did know that the couple who owned the house where the pickup sat had a deranged son, who had been sent to a mental hospital after an incident when he was 14. I was filled with fear. I closed the curtains to my window before the sun had even set that night, and before I went to bed locked every window and door in the house. I was convinced that this insane man who watched me walk to school was going to kill me. When I finally did fall asleep that night, I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of our doorbell being pressed repeatedly, almost as if someone were leaning on it. I looked across the hall and my mother was standing in her doorway, face white as a sheet. I scampered across the hall and held my little brother tightly as my mum went to the door. Without opening it, she shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" There was no reply, only the sound of the doorbell persisting. Through the peephole, she saw the man who drove the truck parked 5 houses down. She shouted that she was calling the police. As she dialed 911 on her phone, the ringing stopped and was shortly replaced by banging, as if the man was trying to break down the door. Red and blue lights flooded our street, and the man ran off through the street. The police didn't chase him. Instead, parking in our driveway, they asked my mother if she had told him to go away. Panicked and crying, she told them she hadn't, and they said there was nothing they could do. She asked to file a restraining order, but they said there was no way to know for sure it was the man down the street. I told them the license number of the truck that was parked in the church's parking lot, and that the man who drives it was the same man my mum saw ringing our bell. The police wrote it down but didn't seem interested, and after about 20 minutes of asking questions, they left and advised we locked our doors. My mother Googled the last names of the couple down the street and found out that their son had been discharged at the same time that the truck started showing up in the parking lot. He had been arrested for raping two 12-year-old girls when he was 14, and it was determined that he suffered from a mental disability. He was sentenced to serve 30 years in a mental hospital, and then to be put on parole. We moved. To this day, I'm still convinced that he was trying to kidnap me that night. Let's not meet again.
I'm a girl, and this happened when I was 20 in the early 2000s. People used landlines and cell phones were not unlimited. This happened in a town about an hour away from Sacramento. My friend was house sitting for a family that her family was friends with from church. She was to house sit in the country just outside of town for a week. They had animals like cats, rabbits, a donkey, and a horse. The family also had dogs too, but they took the dogs with them. My friend was in charge of feeding the animals and watching the place. She didn't have to get the mail daily because they had this metal lockbox style mailbox down their long driveway. They didn't have any neighbors for miles, just fields of alfalfa, cattle, and corn. So I guess the lockbox was for safety. Towards the end of the week, she asked if I wanted to spend the night and keep her company, and I thought it sounded fun. I had moved out of my aunt and uncle's and gotten my own apartment, so I told her I'd pick her up on the way there after getting out of work. We got there around 9:30 p.m, grabbing dinner on the way. We went into the barn first thing and fed the animals. It was late for their dinner and they made their hunger known with their animal noises. We made sure they had water and then went inside. The house was this big ranch-style house, single story. The living room was to the left as you walked into the home. There was a long hallway directly to the right of the entrance that led to where the bathroom and the bedrooms were. Straight ahead was the dining area, and to the left of that was the kitchen area and a patio door. They did not have an open floor plan. In the kitchen on the opposite side from the dining area was a long hall that had several doors. My friend explained that the wife ran a daycare center out of the house. These rooms were the play areas for the kids she took care of. We didn't bother going over there because we had no interest. We watched some TV, ate our leftovers, and talked about people we knew. As it got later, she turned on the house alarm and said she didn't like sleeping in other people's beds, so she had been sleeping on the couch, and then offered it to me. She would sleep on one of the two huge recliners that reclined so far back it was almost flat. The chairs were really comfortable, so I just said I'd take the chair. I went and laid back in the chair with my blanket. We turned off the TV and were talking for maybe 20 minutes in the dark, when the motion center floodlights started shining through the window, lighting up the room. Now, I really have no idea why people in a country think it's okay to not have curtains or blinds, because to me that's insane. We both got quiet, and Amanda says, maybe it was one of the cats. We then start hearing gravel crunch, like a person walking across gravel in the parking area outside. My chair was closest to the window and I slid carefully down to the floor, clutching the stupid blanket the whole time. The floodlight timed out and my friend slid to the floor too. We laid on our stomachs in the dark, not knowing what to do for a minute, when we heard a loud bang, and all of a sudden the house alarm started blaring and the floodlights turned on again. It was so loud, we covered our ears and I started to panic. I swear I've never been so close to peeing my pants in my life. I began crawling towards the keypad for the security, because I've seen the commercials. There's a button you push and a person responds to you in case of an emergency, or at least sends the police. The main screen says, Patio 1 of 2 open. Amanda starts to cry a little and hits the call assistance button on the pad and nothing happens. There's no assistance. I ask her where the phone is, and she says there's a phone in the kitchen and one in the parents' room down the hall. So our choices are to go to the kitchen past the windows and next to one of the patio doors, or to go down the hall to the parents' room and use the phone there. I asked her where the other patio is, and she said it was in the daycare part of the house. It was an easy decision. We go inside the parents' room and it's pitch black. I ask her where's the phone, and she says, I think we have to turn on a light. I really don't want to turn on a light, but have no choice. I don't have a flashlight and I didn't bring myself because I had limited minutes. It was a simpler time and Amanda didn't even have her own cell until after this happened. She turns on the light and we start looking around the room. Not only did these people not have curtains on any window, but they didn't even have closet doors. We see a golf club leaning against the wall by the bed. They probably have it instead of a baseball bat, which is what I had next to my bed at home. We figure, if we hit someone with it, it's going to leave a mark. She grabs it and we continue our search for the phone. Looking at the obvious places, we find a cordless phone stand, minus the actual phone. The alarm is still raging. We have a light on and the person who opened the patio door is bound to notice, is all I'm thinking at this point. She asks, should we use the locate phone buttons? I look at her and respond, yeah, if you want some strange guy coming in here with it and asking us if we were looking for something. I'm getting mad that I'm scared and in this situation. Standing there, knowing we have to go to the kitchen, the house alarm stops. It gets country quiet. If you've lived in the country, you know what I'm talking about. There isn't another golf club for me to grab, so I make her go out first, flipping every light on and keeping the doors we pass in the hall closed. We double back to the security panel, and it still says patio open. Hit call button and it still doesn't work. Double checking the front door is locked, we start for the kitchen. I tell her we have to check the patio near the kitchen, and I grab a big knife that wasn't even close to being sharp from the kitchen. We check the patio door near the kitchen and it's locked. We turn on all the lights and grab the phone and dial 911. The phone isn't a cordless phone, it's one of the old ones with a cord attached on a wall. My friend is on the phone with a dispatcher telling her what happened and I hear a whistle coming from outside the kitchen window. The thing people don't think about is, while you have the reflection of the inside on the window, people on the outside have a clear view of you, unless you press your face against the window. I hear the whistle again. It sounds like someone trying to get someone else's attention kind of whistle. But I don't see anything outside, and I'm not pressing my face to the window to see if I'm the person they're whistling for. My friend is still talking to the dispatcher and is crying and saying she doesn't have the address to the house. She hands me the phone and I say, hello? The dispatcher lady, who sounds annoyed, tells me she needs an address to send police to. I ask that she trace the call and she says something like, you're house sitting and you don't even know where you're at? Scared, angry and overwhelmed, I hand the phone back to Amanda and start looking for something with an address in the kitchen. I'm looking for it in the junk drawer, on the counter, on the refrigerator, fully keeping an eye down the hall that has the daycare rooms, knowing that on the other side of one of those doors is a patio door that was opened. Amanda tells the lady that she doesn't pick up the mail because of their lockbox, and then a few seconds later, removes the phone from her ear and stares at me with a blank face. I ask her if they're tracing the call, because I cannot find anything with an address. Amanda tells me, she said I hope the police find you in time, and hung up the phone. I was now really scared and angry at the same time. We knew that there were people outside. We knew that the patio door to the daycare area was opened. We did not know what to do. We stood in the kitchen silent for what seemed like forever, but it was probably 1 minute. I picked up the phone and dialed 411. I told Amanda that they would have the number to the police department. As calmly as I could, I explained what was happening to us to 411. I included the 911 dispatcher and said we really needed the phone number of the town's police department. When we heard a huge metal bang outside the kitchen window by the patio door. It sounded like someone dropped something metal and heavy. Amanda started crying and I couldn't hold in my fear anymore, and I started crying too. The 411 operator said they were connecting us and would stay on the line with us after getting pissed at the 911 dispatcher on our behalf. A police officer answered the phone and the 411 operator started explaining what was happening to the police. They were asked to disconnect once we had an established connection. The police asked a few questions and we heard the whistle again outside and floodlights all around the house turned on again. I was too scared to look outside and we had never turned on the patio light because we had to walk past the patio window to get to the switch. We told the policeman on the phone about the whistle and he said that there should be several policemen showing up shortly and to stay on the phone. We were just outside the town limits and I knew it might take a few minutes. Having an officer on the phone made me feel a little better, but I was still really scared. He told us that the police arrived and were coming up the drive. The policeman said to put down the gun and open the door, so I did. What I saw was a police pickup truck with spotlights flashing into the pastures that ran along both sides of the drive. 2 officers, not with handguns but with shotguns, walking slowly beside the truck as it came up the long drive. 4 officers approached the house, asking us our names. One went to the phone and said they were here and hung up the phone. They ordered us to stay in the dining room and began searching the house and property. One by one they returned. The last one came in through the patio door by the kitchen. He said he searched the barn and the horse scared him, and the horse also looked spooked. He asked what other animals were in the barn. They told us they didn't find anyone and that the daycare patio was not locked. There was, however, a broom handle in the track to prevent it from being opened too far. I looked at the patio door that the officer entered in and saw that there was not a broom handle in that one, then felt dumb because he just walked through it. They lectured Amanda about not knowing the address of the house that she was supposed to be responsible for, and other stuff I don't remember. After finishing statements, they said they'd stick around and look more, and if we wanted to leave, we could. They could lock the bottom lock, but not activate the alarm, and we were cool with that. We were out of there so fast. We got into my car and went to her mum's. So, mentally exhausted, we fell asleep and I went to my office job the next morning. She said she didn't really want to go back to the house, but she had to feed the animals their breakfast. Her mum told her to take her sister, and she did. That afternoon, she called me at work. She was really nervous and began telling me that when they went into the house, there was footprints in poop on the carpet. I said it was probably the cops that checked the barn. She said she didn't know or pay attention. Also, she said that when they went into the barn to feed and water the animals in the morning, someone had tied all the rabbits' legs together in their hutches. They had 10 rabbits. Amanda then continues to say that there was a note with the word lucky scribbled on the back of a pizza coupon. She thought it came from the refrigerator door because the flyer was missing a coupon. It took a while for them to untie the rabbits, and Amanda asked their mum to find someone else from their church to finish the house sitting. She wasn't going back. She also told the officer what she came back to, but no one was ever caught, and the police never called either of us to update us.
I need to get this off my chest. It happened this time last year, and to this day, every time I think about it, it gives me the chills. So I want to start off by saying that I work for this company, and I still have anxiety every time I go into work. The company is huge, one of the biggest names in the world. For privacy purposes, I'm going to call it the Big Cheese, or Big C. I also want to mention that I have crippling social anxiety. I accredit to being homeschooled most of my life. This will make more sense later. Well, September of last year, I was fresh out of high school and looking for work. I needed this job immediately because I was living with my significant other and we were barely getting by. My father and my grandfather, they both either work or worked for this company for a long period of time, and it is something that garnered a lot of respect in my family. So of course I was thrilled when I first got my interview. It went great, and I was all set to start training, which involved a few classes and on-the-job training. The classes were awkward to say the least, but nonetheless informative. Well, after the classes, we had our first task: to join a group of fellow trainees and tour the work environment. This was when I met my creepy co-worker. He was in the very back of my group, seemed a little shy, and didn't really talk to the rest of the group, unless he was trying to make an awkward joke to join in. At first, I just kind of felt bad for him. He seemed harmless, but definitely awkward and out of the loop. Knowing as much as I did going into the company, I made the effort to inform him and keep him updated with what the trainers were asking us to do. He just seemed to get lost and confused. I thought I was doing a good thing by helping him out, and even my significant other thought so at the time. The training went well. The training went by without any hiccups, and soon we were given the location of where we'd start out. Ironically enough, the only person I had gotten to know, creepy co-worker, had the same area I did. Realizing that we'd start out together, and both didn't know anyone, we decided to exchange phone numbers. This was so that we could both meet up the next week, starting day, so we wouldn't get lost. I thought nothing of this when he asked for my number, and just assumed it was more because he was nervous, and didn't know anyone besides me. Boy, did I live to regret that. The first day of training, we met up at basically a flagpole so we could wait for our on-the-job trainer, Christy. When he got off the employee shuttle, he started texting me, asking me where I was. I was in the smoking section, a little ways away, killing my fears with a cigarette. I text back telling him where I was, and he asked if he could join. I didn't like how nervous I felt, so I wasn't really comfortable with anyone joining me, this time of reprieve. But I saw him coming over anyways, so I scooted over to make room for him on the bench. This didn't matter because he was apparently going to sit as close to me as possible anyways. I hate touch, or people in my personal bubble being the victim of a trauma. Touch was something only people very close to me have permission to do. Creepy co-worker then proceeded to ask me if he could bum a cigarette. I'm not so good at saying no, so I gave him one. After he lit up, he handed me back my lighter. I didn't even notice that he took it from the top of my bag. Again, I just kind of ignored the unwarranted invasion of my space. We talked since we had about 30 minutes to kill. How do you feel about the company? Where do you want to end up in it? I noticed he was always wearing tattoo-covering sleeves, and I asked him about his tattoos. He pulled down the sleeves and started going over almost each and every one, all something to do with either a love interest or something geeky. I listened out of mild curiosity, but quickly got uncomfortable when he started pulling out his phone to show me pictures of the ones he drew. I was uncomfortable because he kept showing me pictures of himself as well, mostly photos of him shirtless, and I didn't really find that appropriate. He mentioned he was a Marine and how he had gained so much weight after his last tour. I apologized out of sympathy, but I guessed that it was nothing to be ashamed of. Unfortunately, after that, he kept smiling at me in a way that I deemed to be admiration. I had seen this look from my fiancée, so I knew somewhere I had effed up. I quickly turned the conversation to more appropriate stuff like music taste. He seemed interested in what music I liked, a little too much, and decided he should make me a playlist. I said it wasn't really necessary, but he insisted. Later into that very day, during training, he kept purposely doing kind things like taking heavy boxes from my hands or taking odd jobs that he deemed too grueling for a lady. I was a little annoyed, but mostly glad. Most of the jobs meant that he'd have to go to a different area and give me some space. He'd always find a way back to appear beside me and scare me. I hate being scared, and he laughed it off every time. I was more than uncomfortable at this point, and a nervousness had settled in the pit of my stomach. At the end of the night, we'd been sent home and come back the next day. He'd decided to walk me out. We'd walk back through the maze my workplace actually is, all the way to the employee costume center lockers. It was there that we had gotten our work costumes and stored our regular clothes in our lockers. Well, I was having trouble remembering the combination, and I couldn't find the little slip of paper that told me it. Creepy co-worker came up and smirked at me, seemingly waiting for me to finish up. I thought that he had left by now. I wasn't expecting him to show up. After a few tries, he reached over and sorted the combination of my lock out for me. This was a serious red flag for me. He had already memorized my combination, and now I felt as though my privacy had completely gone. Again, I'm super awkward and unsure of what to do in any situation like this, so I thanked him, but suggested that he let me figure it out by myself next time. I was hoping he would, so that he would forget my combination. Remember this for later. After changing back into my regular clothes in the girls' locker room, I came out, and he was still waiting for me. I asked him why he was waiting, and he could have just gone home sooner, to which he replied, "Because I'm a gentleman, and a lady should want to be walked to her car, so she could be kept safe." I told him that my significant other was waiting to pick me up. He asked where, and I told him down the street like an idiot. I still don't know why I complied with this creep as much as I did, but I had never been in a situation like this one. He told me that it was too far for me to walk alone, and it wasn't safe, so he offered to drive me over to my significant other's car due to how tired I was, and how much I ached from the day. I just didn't have the strength to argue. I mean, he was creepy, but nice. I chalked up the creepiness to him just being awkward. So without anything else weird happening, he took me to my significant other's car, whom I had been texting the entire time, just to let him know where I was and what was going on. I had a deep gut feeling that I should text him everything I knew about this guy, so I did. When we pulled up, I immediately got out of the car, and my boyfriend sat there, leaning against the car, with his arms crossed. He wasn't very happy about the guy giving me a ride, but nonetheless thanked the creepy co-worker for getting me over to him safely. The co-worker nodded, seeming to smirk at my boyfriend the entire time. This was when my boyfriend got a bad feeling about this guy. So we got home and my boyfriend warned me about the guy, telling me he wasn't getting a good vibe from this creepy co-worker. So when we got home, my boyfriend warned me about the guy, telling me he wasn't getting a good vibe from creepy co-worker. It was not 3 minutes after that I got a text from the co-worker. He started sending me songs and memes, telling me things like, "I really feel like you get me." Now, I was deeply concerned. What the hell did I get myself into? Why the hell did I have to be so goddamn nice to people? The following day at work, I was on the last day of training and I had a massive pain attack. I have a chronic illness, and the situation ended with none of my managers listening to me when I told them that the pain doesn't last, it just comes and goes. They proceeded to rush me into an emergency room. The stretcher carried me through work, whilst I was crying and trying to hide my face. The costumers were quick to take out their phones and film the whole thing. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. But what happens next is worse. I received about 20 texts from creepy coworker asking me how I was. At this point I was done, I just didn't respond. After a few random memes, he started texting me that he was drunk and thinking about not going home to his wife. This was the first time that he ever mentioned to me that he had a wife. I was dumbfounded. Why was he so concerned about me when he obviously had someone he loved enough to marry? I didn't respond. I went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to my boyfriend looking at my phone in anger. My heart sank. I can only imagine what creepy coworker had sent now. My boyfriend showed me the only text I had gotten since the night before. It was from his wife texting me from his phone. She wrote a message explaining that creepy coworker had a problem getting attached to women. She warned me that I should stay away from him, and then she told me her name. My name. It was after that she explained my name was a thing for him. All of his exes had the same name. Now, at this point, my boyfriend is telling me not to go back to this job, and it wasn't worth it. But that's not me. I wasn't going to let one creep ruin this opportunity for me. This job meant the world to me, and I never wanted to let it go. So I told him if this continues, I'd go to HR. But in all honesty, I really didn't want to go to HR. I was the new girl. I didn't want the first month on the job to be me fighting a harassment case. Biting my nails the whole way, I went into work. Suddenly, creepy coworker wasn't hovering anymore. I thought this might have been him being embarrassed. I was pretty convinced that I wasn't going to have a problem after that. Big mistake. On my lunch break, he made sure to go on his lunch early and come find me. His normal enthusiastic attitude was gone, replaced with what felt like anger. I was scared. He came up to me and let me know that his wife was full of shit, and just angry because he was divorcing her. At this point, I didn't want anything to do with him, so I kept quiet, hoping he'd take the hint. Nope. He told me he had a gift for me, and that he'd have to give it to me after the shift. Walking quickly away before I could respond. After my shift, I go outside to the work area and to the lockers. I had waited an extra hour and a half, even taking a closing position from a coworker, just so he'd go home before me. Well, my locker wasn't locked all the way, and now I was freaked out. I opened the locker to grab my bag and go, but noticed it. A rolled up piece of drawing paper. I know what kind it was because I'm an artist myself. Unrolling it was a naked girl. A naked girl that resembled my video game character on World of Warcraft. I had briefly mentioned my WoW addiction to my group on the first day of group training day. I didn't realize he had heard of any of that, much less memorized the information. Suddenly he walks up, even though he should have been gone a long time ago, and confronts me. He asked me if I like it, and because he seemed angry, I said, yes. I suggested he didn't do it anymore because my boyfriend wouldn't like this type of gift at all. He rolled his eyes and playfully giggled at me, like I was joking with him. I wasn't. Not only did he follow me the whole way out of the work grounds, he got on the employee shuttle that I got on. He sat right next to me, leaning on me. I felt like a deer in the headlights, mentally begging someone to suggest that he shouldn't be so close to me. No one paid any attention. Instead, I spent the whole drive trying to get this man to pull his arm off my shoulders. I felt nauseated, and my head was spinning. After we got out, I practically dashed off the bus and ran to my boyfriend, who parked the car at the entrance to the employee parking zone. I got in the car and told him to go. We took off and I started crying. I told my boyfriend, and he was pissed. He wanted to turn around and punch creepy coworker, but I talked him out of it through tears. I promised that I'd talk to my managers after that. Well, I kept looking for the right time to pull a manager aside, but I never got a chance the next night I went in. Now, creepy coworker's attitude did another 180, and he was being extremely weirdly playful. Then he crossed the final line. He grabbed my butt where the costumers could easily see him. My co-workers kind of laughed and thought it was a game. Because this time I was so pissed and pushed to my limits, I went after him. I legitimately punched him in the ass and shouted in his face, "How'd you like that, huh?" Seething, he seemed unfazed by my anger. Instead, he laughed it off and winked at me. I went down into the basement for the employee bathroom and quickly threw up the contents of my stomach. I cried in the stall, praying to God that this would stop. I quickly made an excuse, used my chronic illness, and I went home. So fast forward a couple of weeks, he had completely swapped out his shifts so he wouldn't work with me. I felt like I had won the battle. I sent a message and he realized he'd crossed the boundaries. Until the night before Christmas Eve, I had a terrible feeling as my boyfriend was driving me to work that night. I mean, I felt gross. I got to work and he was there, flirting with other girls, suddenly having this big ego I had never seen him display before. Like I said, when I met him, he was shy and awkward. It's like his personality flipped every time I had to see him. I never knew what side of creepy coworker I was going to get. That night he actually stomped off as all the other coworkers and I closed the joint. We were scrubbing like normal, and he didn't seem all together, so he clocked out early, and I relaxed. I figured he'd gotten into trouble since one of our 4 managers seemed to be upset that he clocked out without permission. I was there extra late. The evening festivities were done with for the night, and my zone was pretty much closed off from the costumers. So I walked around the massive property that is my work. To get to the street, I had started taking new ways to meet my boyfriend who picked me up, just so I couldn't be followed. This time I was going to walk straight out of the grounds and onto the street where the bus stops were, and my boyfriend would be waiting at the curb. I was about halfway through my approximately 12-minute walk, and I was in a dark area. And out of nowhere, I'm sure as you've already guessed, creepy coworker shows up. He starts yelling my name, and he followed me from behind. I pretend not to notice and walk faster. He yells my name again, and seems angrier. I sprint all the way to cross the shuttle zone and end up crashing into someone's chest. Thank God it was actually my boyfriend who had a really bad feeling and wanted to be as close to my work exit as possible. I looked back and creepy coworker got on the shuttle but was staring from the window, smiling like the Cheshire Cat the whole time. Never in my life had I been so terrified. After that, the next night was Christmas Eve and I was supposed to work. But I just knew if I went in, something bad was going to happen to me. So crying the whole time, I knew I'd earned a bunch of points for calling out to avoid him. I cried, asking the lady on the phone if I was going to get fired, and she honestly couldn't say. I respected that, but knew I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let this fucking creep make me lose the job I had worked so hard to get, even changing my appearance to fit their strict standards. No. So I wrote to the only person I could think of. My trainer, Christy. She was a lead, and she was the kindest girl you'd ever meet. Heart of gold. You just knew being her friend meant that you had a trusted confidant for life. I told her everything and sent screenshots of the text he sent to me. I finally told someone with an ounce of leadership that I was scared of going into work. Immediately she responded and asked if she could tell the managers. And even though I was incredibly nervous, I told her, yes. The next day I was pulled in, and God bless my ex-manager, Christopher, because he was actually shocked at everything that happened to me and quickly helped me write a report for HR. He led me through the steps and even changed the schedule so I wouldn't work with creepy coworker unless he specifically traded shifts. 2 months go by, and I'm well acquainted with the responsibilities of my work at this point, and I'm comfortable, but of course, there's no stopping a stalker. He had traded a shift and was working the night shift with me. He was angry every time he looked at me, and I avoided him at all costs. Then, around halfway through my shift, I'm down in the basement, coming back from the restroom. I'm walking up the stairs that lead back up to my work area. And then, beside my head, he leans in and says, "You should smile more." The bastard chuckles and walks away. I feel pretty hysterical at this point, and run to the closest lead, crying and trying to explain what happened. It was at this point my manager Christopher, pissed off that HR was taking too long to investigate my case, went to tell them to speed it up. Well, after 4 months of an interview process with HR, finally the case was resolved, and not only was he let go, but I was doing really well in my job finally. Nothing to worry me into not paying attention to my duties. Creepy coworker has left me alone ever since, but sometimes I get random friend requests from guys with no pictures and always similar names, always close to his name. Creepy coworker, leave me alone or you won't like the results. I won't be intimidated, and I will win every battle you throw at me. So let's not ever meet again.
So this happened roughly about 2 years ago. I worked at a hotel, which had 50 rooms between 3 floors. I was the only employee in the building after about 5 p.m. It should be noted, I am a girl. The hotel is on the farther side of the city, but it's considered to be on the nicer side. So a lot of companies will send their workers to us for room and board, instead of the shadier motels on the opposite side of the city. Some of them were great guests. Others completely trashed everything. But that happens everywhere, I suppose. The layout of the building was pretty simple. You pull up at the front entrance, enter the foyer, and the front desk/lobby is right through a set of automatic doors. Right across the hall from the lobby was a staircase leading up to the 2nd floor, and to the left was our elevators to the 2nd and 3rd floor. The 1st floor only has rooms on one side to compensate for our pool, workout room and breakfast area/dining room, as well as the lobby and the office rooms all being on the opposite side. The upper floors have rooms on each side, with the 3rd floor having the most rooms. Typically, the 3rd floor, the highest, we kept only for business and long stays. 2nd floor was reserved for short stays or bigger parties. And the 1st floor we kept open for elders who have wheelchairs or walkers, or people who come in late at night for a one-night stay. I promise this is relevant to the story. Anyway, it was getting towards the last few hours of my shift. It was slow that night, aside from a few work groups I'd checked in a few hours earlier. I noticed a raggedy, rusted, and beat-up black pickup truck pulling up into the brightly lit car pit. So I got my paperwork ready for check-in. A guy gets out, completely covered in dirt. I figured he just got off work, as most guys come in covered in dirt or oil. I do especially remember that he reeked, which isn't too out of the norm either. I just chalked it up to him being an oil field or construction worker. I got his credentials. His name was Michael, and I scanned it into the computer. He also was reluctant to leave his vehicle information with me, though I explained if he didn't, his vehicle was at risk of being towed by morning. I thought he caved just because he was only going to be here for the night. Michael requested a 2nd floor room, close to the lobby staircase so he could have easy access to the front doors for smoking. Not out of the norm either. After taking his payment, I set up his room keys. I explained parking policies and explained how he can get into his room, which was right up the staircase, and the door was on the opposite wall. He had a few bags with him, and he went upstairs. Almost immediately, he comes back down the stairs and he accuses me of giving him broken room keys. I had to explain that if he put them anywhere next to his phone or anywhere near a magnet, potentially in his wallet, the keys will deactivate. I did offer to take him upstairs and open the room for him to make sure the new set of keys worked, and they did. He walked into his room by himself, shut the door. So with that, I was on my way back down to the lobby. When I got back in the office, something odd caught my eye on the cameras. He had not left the building, but his car wasn't in the front anymore. He didn't mention anything about having another person with him. If there was, we're supposed to charge a $10 fee per extra person. The side doors don't open unless you have a room key or are on the inside of the hotel. So I started to watch the cameras to make sure he wasn't trying to sneak people in. About 20 minutes pass, and I notice nothing happening except him coming down the stairs. I smile politely and he goes outside. He stays outside for about 10 minutes, just standing in the carport. I can see it on camera. Now, while I thought that was a little weird, I just chalked it up to him taking a smoke. I stopped paying attention after a while and started to file my paperwork that was due before my shift ended. Michael ran back into the hotel, cigarette still in his mouth. I instructed him that he must take his cigarette outside and put it out. I told him prior, we do not allow smoking inside the building. He just threw it on the ground and put it out with his shoe. He turned his attention towards the TV and ended up sitting in the lobby for an ungodly amount of time. He kept glancing towards the door, which made me uncomfortable. During this time, the friendly demeanor he had at check-in completely disappeared. He seemed paranoid and agitated now. He would whisper to himself. I couldn't hear what. After about 30 minutes of him doing this, I instructed him to go back up to his room because I can't have people in the lobby when I'm working on closing procedures. This was a lie, but ownership allows us to make up reasons if we're uncomfortable with a guest's presence. Michael asked me to take him up to his room because he's uncomfortable and scared. I explained that I'm unable to do that for safety reasons. What I could do was watch him go up the stairs on camera, and he could call down to the office on his room phone when he arrived into his room. I was just trying to be friendly and get him upstairs as quick as I could. He goes upstairs, but immediately comes back down, and he informs me that he forgot where his room was and I would need to show him. I told him I can't leave the office or lobby, but I can explain it to him where his room was, because it was super simple. He was continuing his whispers. This time it was about him losing his phone. I didn't pay any mind to it. After explaining to Michael where his room was, he went back upstairs, and I heard the door slam shut. It echoed throughout the second and first floors, and it gave me chills for some reason. Almost immediately, he comes back down and he starts yelling at me, telling me that I stole his cell phone, that I'm planning his demise, and that I need to find his phone. This was, of course, completely bogus, as I haven't left the office since making sure his room key worked. He asked me for help, and I just wanted him to go away. So I slipped a screwdriver in my pocket, just in case he tried to attack me, and I began rummaging through the lobby couches, looking for his phone. I didn't find it, but I did find his credit card, which he also began accusing me of stealing. I stood my ground and said that if he can't respect me in my place of work, I can call the police and request that they escort him into his room or off the facility. He got angrier. He snatched his card from my hands and went back outside. After about 20 more minutes, he comes back inside. He is calmer, but he asks if I would, please, go outside with him, because there is something wrong with his car. After I absolutely refuse, he tells me that I need to go outside, that it's not fair that he's the only person out there working on his car, and that he needs some help. I had to explain that I'm not allowed to accompany a guest outside of the building. He just starts repeating that I absolutely have to go outside with him. Now, I have anxiety, and I tend to let my mind roam over wide horizons. And this was no different. I was about to have a panic attack, so I called the owners and I asked them what I should do. It was my first hotel job, and although I have tons of freedom doing my job, I still want to know how to properly handle these situations. The owner told me if I'm uncomfortable and suspect that he is under the influence or a danger to myself or himself, I have full reign to call the police, have them ban him from the property. I asked if they could just keep an eye on the cameras. They have access to them at home. Because he's acting weird. I locked all the lobby doors, and I made sure the side and fire exits were all properly secured and closed, so that no one could sneak in. I did this while I was on the phone with my boss, because I was scared to leave the office by myself. After getting back behind the office, I locked the door, and I just brace for him to come back inside. My boss tells me to just watch the cameras and keep my cell phone nearby, just in case I have to call for help. Meanwhile, I noticed on the cameras that I couldn't see Michael anymore. I didn't know where he parked, but I damn sure wasn't going to go looking. But what I did notice is there was another vehicle driving through our parking lot. I called the hotel next door to ask if the car was on their cameras too, and I was informed that it was an unknown vehicle to their records. It was unknown to mine as well. This just shot my anxiety up even higher. The car would drive around to the back of the building, to the front, but avoid the carport, would turn, and then do the same to the building next door. The parking lot was empty, so I know they weren't looking for a parking spot. The car keeps going, and I'm watching it on the camera so focused that I didn't notice Michael came back inside. Telling Michael that he either needs to go up to his room or vacate the premises, he just continues to yell at me, saying I need to go outside with him. He won't move out from in front of the entrance. I imagine he was staying within the view of whoever else he kept looking back at. Then, randomly, I see him sprint across the parking lot and out of the view of the camera. I also didn't see the car anymore after that. Since it was practically the end of my shift, I somehow managed to get everything done just in time for the next shift to arrive. I was so glad to see her that I almost cried. I explained to her what had happened and that the owners want her to keep the lobby doors locked. We put up signs explaining that our doors were broken, and due to safety reasons, guests would have to call for entry or use the side entrances for their room. I also deactivated Michael's room keys and told the next shift girl not to let him back. If he shows up, to call the police because he is a security risk. I made sure she watched me get into my Uber ride. After triple checking the vehicle and that the driver matched what my phone said. Since I was a regular customer of the driver, he asked me why I was so riled up. I asked him to drive through the parking lot with his doors closed so I could see if Michael's truck or the other vehicle I saw driving across the parking lot were anywhere near the buildings. And they weren't. I have no idea what happened to them. The next day, I had my boyfriend come stay the entire evening shift, just in case he came back. Because I was told by my bosses that he never came to get his stuff. He wouldn't pick up the phone for calls either. Nothing happened that night, or any other night. Except for a month later. Michael came in, asking about his stuff, and if he could get a room. I refused his room, and luckily, other people were with me in the lobby and the office. I had our maintenance man go retrieve his items, and explain that he is no longer allowed on the property. If we saw him, the police would be called, and he would be arrested for trespassing. Again, this wasn't true, but we didn't want him coming back at all. I noticed Michael had a different vehicle this time. It was a newer model SUV, and it was maroon. It matched neither his beat-up black pickup truck or the dark-coloured sedan I saw driving in circles. If there was anything that sat with me, even after all this time, it was that he remembered my name. He addressed me by my name when he walked up to the counter. And at first I thought, oh yeah, my name is a part of my uniform. Until I realised I forgot to put on my name tag that day. After that, I refused to wear one in the hotel. Management let me create a fake name and wear that from that point on. It took me a while to feel safe in the building again, especially while I was alone. I constantly had my boyfriend with me while I worked the evening shift. There is a chance that the guy and the circling vehicle are unrelated. But my anxiety and the aura that I got from Michael that night, it didn't feel good or right. So, Michael, let's not meet ever again.
At age 12, I started babysitting for family friends who had 3 daughters ages 4 to 7. They lived in a cul-de-sac where nearly every home housed a young couple with children in elementary school. This neighborhood was extremely close-knit, like the 1950s American block party communities. They had communal policy on using one another's toys. Any kid could use a play structure in someone else's yard at any time without asking. Shortly after I started working in the neighborhood, they revised the rule to any time a family is not using a babysitter to watch their kids, to ensure I would not get overwhelmed supervising a swarm of kids I wasn't paid to watch. It was thus more or less known when parents were going out and leaving someone in charge of their children. I was welcome to take the girls to play in any other yard as they wanted. Their parents even gave me permission to let them play in someone else's yard or sandbox independently if I needed a short break. Being an avid Babysitters Club reader, I didn't leave the girls outside unsupervised. I would wait until someone else wanted a water or bathroom break, and then corral everyone inside temporarily. Similarly, when the girls wanted to play in a treehouse owned by an older couple a few doors up the street, I climbed up, despite a slight fear of heights, and crouched in the little house with them, despite feeling claustrophobic, to follow my own rule. I don't recall whether my everyone inside, everyone outside together rule preceded the first odd interaction I had with the immediate next door neighbor or not. But when the police questioned the girls I babysat years later, they said nothing bad ever happened when I watched them because I set up that weird, sometimes annoying rule. One day while playing basketball with the girls in the driveway, the next door neighbor came outside in a baseball cap and sunglasses, and sat down on a second-story deck to read a paperback. I later noticed he turned his chair 180 degrees to face us and the basketball hoop. I couldn't tell if he was looking at us. He had no reaction to me staring at him, flipping the pages in the book like someone would when reading. This behavior repeated every time we played basketball for 5 years I watched the girls. Eventually, once I noticed him in the chair, accessories on, I would suggest a game we could play inside or in the front yard, but out of view. The strange neighbor was familiar to me as he went to my church. I've never seen someone kneel in a pew, head bowed and hands folded, with the same level of intensity before or since. Once my family was seated behind him, the priest came over to ask me to lead the children's mass during the homily because the usual person was out sick. This guy turned around and glared at me like I was personally set out to interrupt his prayer time. When I worked in the church nursery during various masses, I would often make eye contact with him as he waited in line outside the nursery door to use the restroom. From what I gleaned from our family, friends, and other people in the neighborhood, the odd basketball observer was a nice guy who gave up his apartment and job in the city to move in with and care for his sick elderly mother. Since everyone thought he was great and since he went to church, this was before the Catholic sex scandal broke. I figured I was in the wrong for finding him creepy. Even as young as 12, I was used to guys in their 40s and 50s asking me to go somewhere with them, or driving by slowly as I walked, biked, jogged to make lewd comments. I figured I was projecting those experiences onto this awkward, quiet guy who was not doing anything wrong. For instance, I was certain that if the guy next door was a creep, he would not miss the opportunity to watch with his sunglasses on and book in hand while the kids and I went swimming each summer when the family opened their above-ground pool. But he never set foot out on his deck when the kids and I donned our swimsuits to play in the pool or backyard. I was more convinced I was conceited and mean. Then when I was 15 or 16, I caught him looking in the window as I cleaned up after movie night. The girls and I put on a film after bath time, and instead of watching it theater style in total darkness, we kept some lights on so I could braid the girls' hair. The big screen TV we used for movies was located in an addition on the house with floor and ceiling windows. Though my parents were OCD about shutting blinds and curtains when the sun went down to prevent people from seeing in, our family friends had no window treatments on the big, modern windows. I turned off the last light in the room, a floor lamp next to the window facing the neighbor's house. I could see into the darkness outside where the weird man sat on his deck in a chair in line with the window I was looking through. I looked over my shoulder and realized he had a line of sight on where the girls and I sat on the floor during the movie. As I looked back towards the house, I glimpsed him hustling inside. I would have doubted I'd seen him at all if he had not left the chair in its usual spot. After watching him turn the chair around to read during many a basketball match, I knew where the chair sat that night. Facing the window into the family room was not the chair's usual position on the deck. After that incident, I would suggest playing board games in another room or insist on watching movies theater style to ensure he could not peep on what we did that night. Once the girls were asleep, I avoided the family room entirely. I was paranoid about being watched. If I wasn't in the kitchen doing homework or reading away from all the windows, I'd walk around the original first floor footprint where all the windows had curtains. The first time the parents noticed my change in routine, they insisted I could watch TV or movies in the family room. I didn't mention anything to them because I was worried my concerns were silly and conceited. When I was 17, my family heard an evening cable news story about a man in our town caught in a police sting operation in which a woman pretended to prostitute her 2-year-old. When they raided his house, the police found a ton of child pornography on his computer. Our family friends called a couple weeks later. They wanted to know how I knew the young man next door to them was not safe. He was the guy I'd heard about on TV. As they described it, the police found his blog where he wrote about his obsession with one of the girls who lived next door to him. It detailed his fantasies involving her and his plans to act on them. Things like lying in the treehouse for hours hoping to corner her when she climbed up alone to play. Many of his entries focused on taking advantage or kidnapping the girl while the babysitter was in charge. In his head, babysitters were like the ones in old movies, talking to their friends on the phone or making out with the boy they invited over instead of caring for the children. As it became clear, I did neither of these things. His plans evolved to killing the babysitter, taking the girl, and getting out of Dodge. After talking to the girls to ensure they were not victims, the police suggested I might know something to have acted the way I did. All the pieces, the frequent run-ins at the church when I had the children in my care, or the weird things he did when he knew I was watching the kids next door, all fit together cohesively. I was relieved I was not mean-spirited or imagining things. I was perhaps conceited. The focus was not on me, but on the children. But I was not crazy. I recognized I was not the person at most risk in the situation, and yet, suburb pedo and would-be murderer, let's not meet again.
I'm a female, and when I was about 9 years old, my family used to live in a remote area on the outskirts of town. Considering the location of the suburb, the area was surrounded by warehouses and such. At the time, my family did not have a phone in the house, and neither did our neighbours. There were no cell phones back then, or they were a luxury, and not everyone could afford one, as this took place in the end of the 90s. So, if I needed to call my mum while she was at work, I had to go to either my dad's work or a company next to his which was closer to make a phone call. My dad's work was a relatively short walk from our house, probably 30 minutes or less. My dad was working at a huge unloading dock for metallurgical, natural resource shipments. In order to get to my dad's work, I had to walk past another, adjacent company, just like the one where my dad was working. I will call this Docks 2. My dad's work, as well as Docks 2, had a sort of watchtower. It's just a cabin mounted at the top of a tall platform, and you need to go up a decent amount of stairs to get to the top. There was always a guard inside, overseeing the whole yard from the top, during the day and the night, to make sure no one is in danger, and to make sure there's no break-ins. The phones were located only on site watchtowers at the time. Docks 2 were much closer to our house, roughly about a 10-minute walk. One day, as I've done many times before, I went to Docks 2 to make a call. I climbed the stairs, knocked on the door, and was welcomed in by a guard I used to see quite often and knew well. However, that day, he wasn't alone. New guy, 28 at the time, was there. Apparently, he was a new employee, hired to work shifts. He was this very tanned white guy, always wearing military-style outfits. I was just an average-looking child, looking exactly my age. My hair was very blonde, which made my cheeks always appear rosy red, and gave me even more of a childish appearance. When the new guy saw me that day, he wouldn't take his eyes off me. As soon as I was about to finish my call with my mum, it's just one room so everyone can hear my conversation with her, the new guy went outside to smoke. When I came out, he smiled at me and asked me what my name was, and whether I came there often to make calls. I don't remember what I said, but I felt very shy because he was just staring deeply into my eyes, so I'll call him the creep. Fast forward, and I came to that tower again to make a call, and there he was, but this time he was alone. I spoke to my mum, and as I was about to leave, he asked me if I wanted any tea, to which I refused. He then proceeded to ask how my school was going, and things like that. He offered to help me with my homework, however I told him I've got it all sorted. Harmless, but strange. On a side note, I just want to say that what gave me shivers when I was near him is that whenever he looked at me, he looked drunk, which was very unsettling. Mind you, he wasn't actually drunk, but his eyes would get so hazy and his face would flush red. Sometime later I saw him again. That time, I was walking to my dad's work with my friend, and he was doing some digging in the docks too. When he saw me through the metal fence that was separating us, he just leaned against his shovel and stared at me. He didn't say hi or anything like that. After those encounters, for quite some time I took alternative routes to see my dad, or play with puppies at my dad's work, or make calls to my mum, because he really creeped me out. However, one day, I had to call my mother urgently. My dad's work phone didn't work, so I had to go to Docks 2 Tower, hoping I wouldn't see him. The creep was there, and oh boy, he was happy when I came. He was complaining how I didn't come anymore to see him. As I was making a call, he grabbed another chair and sat right next to me, very close. It took a while for the call because my mum was busy with something, and someone went to get her whilst I was on the line. It felt like hours waiting, and the creep was just sitting next to me, looking at me and smiling. When my mum finally got to the phone, he got up and went to make some tea and brought some biscuits. When I was done talking, he insisted I have some tea with him. I didn't, and he just kept on trying to strike a conversation, but this time, the tone of the conversation was different. He asked me how old exactly I was, and I told him 12 or 13. I have no idea why I lied and said I was older than 9. He told me his age, and although I knew he was much older, I felt really weirded out that he wanted to talk to me so badly, or had any interest in being my friend. My alarms did go off every time I was around him, but I guess I didn't feel overly in danger. He then proceeded to tell me that I was beautiful, and asked me whether I had a boyfriend. He asked me if I have already dated boys, and what type of boys I liked. I was so uncomfortable and so eager to leave at that point, but he would just keep dragging me into these weird conversations. I could tell he'd been drinking that day. When I began moving towards the door, he followed me. Eventually, we were both outside. However, in order to get down from the tower, you need to walk this narrow path towards the stairs. He stood blocking it so that I couldn't leave. He got very close to me and I freaked out. The only escape tactic I could come up with as a child was to pretend that I'm seeing someone from the top of the tower. So I began waving my hand at the road down the bottom and towards the houses, in the distance, pretending I see someone I know and saying, "Oh look, there's my uncle, he's waving at me." The creep looked in that direction, but either didn't care or could tell I was lying. I kept on telling him that my uncle who waved back is an angry man, and if I won't come down this instant and go home, we were both going to get in trouble. The creep didn't budge. He got even closer and eventually pressed me against the railing. He kept on asking me his weird questions whilst I was terrified to move, because I didn't want to move my body against his, if that makes sense, so I just froze. He asked me if I would come on a date with him, and that he's looking for a girlfriend. And at that particular moment, someone was coming up the stairs to the tower, so he let me go, but asked me to come back. I've not told anyone about this encounter at that stage, because I was afraid that my parents would get angry. I also felt very embarrassed and thought that people would judge me for what's happened. Sometime later, I was home and it was around 9 PM. I know the time because it was my bedtime. Suddenly, a car came into our driveway. I came to see who it was through the front room window, and I could see it was the creep, but this time with other guys, blasting music in his car and shouting my name. I have no idea how he knew where I lived. He must have followed me home one day. My dad was outraged. He asked me who these people were, but before I could even answer, he rushed outside. Apparently, the creep asked for me to go out with him and his friends. My dad obviously refused, saying that I am a child and too young to hang out with them or go out at this time of the night, and that if he sees any of them again, he will beat the living daylights out of them. So they drove away. I was so upset with my dad that he called me a child in front of them. Stupid, I know. I think because we lived so far away from everything, I was really keen to make friends, as there were no kids around as such. For a while after that, I hadn't seen the creep or heard of him. A significant time later, I was walking to my dad's work again, and I'd completely forgotten about the creep. He was working in the docks too with his friends, maybe those that came with him that night in the car, or maybe these were just co-workers, I don't know. I got scared when I saw him, and even though he shouted hi, I pretended not to know him. He said something to his friends, and I remember so clearly how one of his friends exclaimed loudly, "Her!" I guess he told them about me, or his interest in me, but no one expected me to be a child. I looked at the guy that exclaimed. He was staring at me in utter disbelief. He must have been 20 or 25 or so, I think. And the creep was saying something to him. His friend screamed at him, "Have you lost your mind?" Clearly, the creep didn't see me as a child like everyone else. Fast forward again, maybe half a year later. One day I was home alone in the evening, waiting for my parents to come back from work. We lived in a very safe community, so sometimes I'd be home myself for a little bit after school till my parents got home. I was playing a game whereby I was a singer. I had this stage created in the living room, and I was performing in front of chairs, pretending chairs were my live audience. It was pitch black outside. At some point, during my performance, I see someone staring at me through the living room window. That person must have been crouching down as only top of the face could be seen from the bottom. As soon as that person realised I saw them, they ran away. I was so embarrassed that someone saw me performing, scared and shocked at the same time, that I was literally glued to the floor. I don't know whether that was him. Our dog didn't react at all, maybe because music was playing very loud. I was scared to go outside the house to check, but peered through the window. However, no one was there. That person had to climb over a wooden fence to get to our living room window. I told my parents about it. I've also asked my friend whether it was him who came round, but he said it wasn't. I don't know if my friend felt shy to admit he was watching me, or whether it was the creep. To finish this up, one day I went to the docks too with my dad, as my dad needed something from there from work. I saw the old guard that I knew well and asked him about the creep, and was told that he doesn't work there anymore. I don't know what happened of him, and I never told my parents what happened. So, even though I know our paths will never cross, let's not meet.
Hi. So, this is a story that happened to me 5 years ago, in 2014. I was 12 years old and my school was pretty far away, so I had to wake up early before everyone to take the bus. This detail will help this matter later. So I just moved to a new house in a small town in Canada with my family. I was friends with most of my children's neighbors, and we used to hang out in the streets and play games in our driveways. It was safe for us to do that, because no cars ever passed by our street, except for the people who lived in the street. And all of our houses were close to one another, so our parents could watch us. Anyway, so weeks passed by and I always felt a bit weird since I moved into this new house, but I didn't think much of it until one night. So me and my friends were playing Vampire, the game where the vampire will chase the human and tries to kill everyone. And this black car passed by, but really slowly. It was a mix between the size of a van, but the look of a fancy car. The windows were tinted black, so we couldn't see who was driving. So the car passed by, and we continued playing. But suddenly, the car makes a U-turn and passes next to us again, slowly. Me and my friends got scared, so we all ran into my driveway to tell my dad. By the time he got there, the car was gone, and since we were young, my dad thought we were kidding and didn't think much of it. So the weekend passed by, and it was now Monday. I had school that day, so I woke up early, 5 a.m., as usual, and went downstairs. It was still dark outside, so I had to turn on the lights in the house. I prepared my cereal bowl and sat at the dining room table to eat. Then I looked outside my window, and I see the same black van that I saw the other day. I panic, and I run upstairs in my room and look by the window. The car is doing a round trip around my street. I didn't want to wake up my family, so I just waited for the car to go away. And I knew he was looking for me because I was the only house with the lights on at this time of day. The next morning, I prepared my bowl of cereal, grabbed a knife with me, and sat to eat. Looked through the window and saw the same van once again. I didn't run upstairs because at this point I was getting used to it and I was armed, so I just closed the light and waited for the car to go away. But after a few minutes, I hear a knocking at the door. The car was parked in my driveway and a tall man was standing at my front door knocking. At this point, I was shaking, crying, and I almost soiled myself. I was ready to die. But surprisingly, the man gave up and went away after a minute. For a year, that car still passed my street every morning, and I never knew who the man was and what he wanted from me. He stopped coming, and we sometimes get called by someone we don't know, and there's no answer when we say, "Hello, who is this?" So to the strange tall man in the van, let's not meet.
"Do you guys like wrestling?" he asked. Looking back on it, what a corny and oddly specific way to greet two kids you're trying to kidnap. But damn, did it almost work. I was probably 8 years old at the time, and every week I watched WWF wrestling on TV with my dad. "Yeah, I do," I answered, as the 30-something man I had never seen before continued to approach my friend and me. We were at a local elementary school for a Little League ball game. While my friend's brother played baseball, we played on the playground and ran around the asphalt blacktop. The closest adults were probably 500 yards away. He didn't have any kids with him, no children of his own or anything like that. I didn't think anything of it back then, but that really sticks out now. "Who's your favorite wrestler?" he asked, standing just feet from us, his hand shoved in his pockets unassumingly. "I like The Big Show and Stone Cold Steve Austin," I replied. I had always been a sociable kid, and still am sociable all these years later. I had never met a stranger, as the saying goes, as ironic as it sounds in this context. My friend, who was much more shy, stood there, silently. "I like him too," replied the stranger. "Hey, I have a bunch of wrestling videos at my house. Do you want to come watch them?" "I don't know about that," I replied. Not because I had a bad feeling about the situation, but because my mum has always made me promise her never to go anywhere with a stranger. "Oh, come on. It'll be fun. Plus, I have a dog who loves kids. Let's go. I'll take you to my truck." For some reason, I felt the need to know this guy's name. Not that it would have made a difference had he chosen to snatch us then and there. It was before cell phones were really popular, and we definitely didn't have one. "What's your name?" I asked. He laughed, more huffed really, before telling me his name was Junior. "Junior what?" I asked. All of a sudden, a worried look came over his face, like me asking him for his real name was all it took to shake him from his plan. "Hey, never mind, y'all have a good day." He began to hurry away, and we turned around and made our way back to the baseball game. We never told my friend's mum. We never talked about it either. I never saw him again. I grew up in a part rural, part suburban community. This particular elementary school was in the more rural part of the county, so I suppose our paths just never crossed again, that I know of. It wasn't until a few years ago, as a matter of fact, that the memory randomly popped into my head, and I realized that the guy was trying to kidnap us the whole time. I'll never know what foiled his plan, but I'm glad that things went down the way they did.